Facebook is on. YouTube is on. Periscope. Twitter's on. All right, cool. Let's start this. Open in browser. And here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Torn Tuesday, your weekly dose of all things Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, books, movies, games. We've been doing this show for what? Over 6, 7 years, 8 years almost?
7 years plus. And hello, everybody. How are you doing? What a wild and wonderful week we've been having. Justin and I are here once again with the Tuesday 5 o'clock Pacific time zone live stream. And if you will bear with us, we're going to bring in a very special guest to join us, and we're going to broaden the conversation as we continue to do every week, opening up and broadening the conversation about all things Tolkien, with an interesting focus now, with all the energy on Amazon Studios' upcoming billion-dollar-plus television series. Oh my goodness, Justin!
Yes, I'm so excited.
Are there more whispers in the wind?
There's more whispers in the wind. We've got so much to talk about. I'm seeing a lot of our regulars in the chat room right now. Hello, Ellen, Jill, Imran, Costas, Dev. Princess Toy Nerd has been a loyal viewer and follower for many years. Hello, everybody.
Yes, hi, Princess Toy Nerd.
Well, let's bring in our special guest today. This is really exciting. This has been a long time coming. We're a huge fan of his work. Please welcome Luke Shelton, PhD. Does that make you a doctor?
It is a doctorate, so I guess, technically. As I like to tell people, I'm not the kind of doctor that helps anybody.
You are officially a Tolkien scholar, I guess, right? You got your doctorate studies in Tolkien?
Absolutely. My dissertation looked at the way that readers under the age of 18 interpreted The Lord of the Rings.
That's awesome, and I've seen you've had a bunch of stuff published in with the Tolkien Society and lots of other stuff, and you're constantly sourcing data and research, aren't you?
Yeah, really. I have an ongoing project called the Tolkien Experience Project, where I talk to different fans and get their answers to 5 standard questions about how they experience Tolkien and what it's been like for them in their journey through Middle-earth. And I post those publicly so anyone can see them. And my work with the Tolkien Society right now is actually I'm the editor of their peer-reviewed journal. So I'm constantly working on that as well. That's a big project that I have every year.
I mean, it sounds like Cliff pursued some of the same efforts, in his documentary Ringers, Lord of the Fans, asking people, what their fandom's like.
As a matter of fact, I am one of the subjects who was asked those questions of Dr. Luke Shelton as part of his study, coincidentally. And it was an absolutely delightful experience. And I mean to underscore absolutely, positively, a really wonderful experience to feel that you could talk to someone and get very granular and very personal about what connects you individually to Professor Tolkien's works. And I find it fascinating, deeply fascinating. And I'm so grateful to have been able to take part. But it's just fascinating, Luke, that you would want to posit this question. I mean, we've all been, I was trying to explore that myself in the documentary. It's about how we respond. It's about our personal responses to a piece of text which does not change and is forever what it is of its time. And yet there's a wild spectrum of many people responding to this great literary work in an ongoing generational way. And I'm amazed, kind of delighted that you would put that forth as a point of query. It's fantastic, really.
Yeah, and this is actually to be a curmudgeon a bit, I guess I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about academia. There's an ongoing debate that's been going on for generations about where does meaning come from in a book? Does it come from the author's intent? Does it come from what's on the page? Or does it come from what we get out of the book, what the interpretation is? And in Tolkien's scholarship, we've paid a lot of attention to what's on the book and what Tolkien intended the book to mean. But we haven't paid a lot of attention to what readers have gotten out of the book. I mean, scholars have been looking at that for decades now, but we haven't given that kind of scholarship a lot of attention. And so really what I'm trying to do is be a bit more public with that kind of scholarship to get it more involved in the conversation and hopefully influence some other people to be more vocal about joy and experience with Lord of the Rings, because one of the things I hear far too often is people saying, I don't want to participate because my experience isn't interesting or special or unique. And my statement is, that's wrong. Your statement is special. Your statement is unique because it's yours and it's no one else's. And that's a wonderful thing that we can all celebrate. And so it really is trying to find the largest diversity and the largest difference between experiences so that we can look at all of these different pathways into Tolkien and say, look how fantastically this has influenced so many people in so many different ways. And we can hold that up and say, this is Tolkien's legacy. This is the impact that he's still having because he's still influencing people even today, brand new readers. And so that's
Indeed.
one of the reasons I am very excited for the Lord of the Rings series from Amazon. So excited to talk to you about that as well.
Indeed. Did somebody in the room say applicability? Well, yes, it was Professor Tolkien. This is where you realize the rubber meets the road in a conversation
Right.
of how Professor Tolkien felt about this subject. If there were to be any clapback or blowback against your approach, and I cannot intellectually see any wisdom in that road, but anything that could, and I'm saying this in a very specific way, Professor Tolkien very much invited individual prism of his readership to apply what they felt, what they recognized generationally inside the seeds of what was symbolism, not overtly, not at all allegorical, as opposed to his friend C.S. Lewis's approach to using very strong, open-handed symbols that did not give the reader any power to interpret what they meant. And Tolkien's intention was to give every generosity to the reader with this preference of his for applicability. What can you tell me about that, Luke? Tell me, really. That was perhaps a motivation for your work as well?
Well, I think that a lot of the people who want to lock in a single meaning for the text do so because Tolkien meant so much to them. And I think that when we keep in mind that it is our personal response, it makes it to where we can give room for other people to have their responses. Because if I were to say my way of reading Tolkien is the only way to read it, then how much poorer of a work is it if it can only be read one way? Instead, I leave room for other people to have their own interpretations, because it's that same distinction between that allegory, which is set in stone and can't be changed, versus the applicability, where it enables not only other people to have their interpretations, but it allows me to have different interpretations at different points in my life. I get so much out of the book now that I didn't see when I was a young reader. And what I saw when I was a young reader is completely different from what I see now, but not because I was uninformed, not because I was dumber, but because that's what was important to me then, which is different from what's important to me now. And so going back to your point, absolutely, we have to make room and leave that space for other interpretations. And that really also helps underscore the way that different adaptations of Tolkien's work have a lot of room and a lot of leeway. Now, I'm not saying that we can completely destroy the work, and I don't think anyone is advocating that, but um, it's like there's a lot of room to play. He created an entire world. And so there are stories in parts of the world that don't touch upon the Lord of the Rings. So let's go off and explore those stories. Why not? There are all kinds of nooks and crannies and crevices and hints and suggestions that we can build on and flesh out in unique and interesting ways. And we're not trying to say that these are authoritative. We're not trying to say that this is Tolkien's intention. We're trying to say this is a cool thing that we can make fit here. And isn't that cool and exciting and interesting and maybe appealing to people who wouldn't otherwise have picked up the books?
Indeed. Well said.
And at the kind of the basic way to of what how everyone has usually described some of these concepts is, even in my family, the people have said that they identify with different characters in the Lord of the Rings at different phases in their life. When they first read it, they couldn't be bothered with Aragorn. It's just like, they just want to be hobbits, or vice versa, or they want to be the action adventure. And then later in life, they're like, I just want to go home and read my books. So there's a truism to what Tolkien wrote and included all these characters in a single story in a single world on purpose, and everything that he did and every character included and every character excluded was purposeful and intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. In my research, I should probably plug that. That's kind of the thing to do, right? So actually, my entire PhD thesis is open access online. You can see it; it's free. And so it's called "Small Hands Do Them Because They Must." Examining the reception of the Lord of the Rings among young readers. And you can actually just Google that and you'll find the entire 100,000 word thesis there. But when I was talking to young readers about the way that they responded to the Lord of the Rings, if they talked about Gandalf and liking Gandalf, they didn't talk about it because they related to him or because they felt like he was similar to them. They talked about him like a dad figure or a granddad figure. But when you talk to older fans in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they see Gandalf much differently than that. They're much more likely to see parts of themselves in Gandalf. In fact, I remember, because part of this project was me going back and looking at my old notes from when I read it when I was like 11, just to make sure that I didn't introduce any of my own bias. In my notes, I said that Gandalf was a very funny character because I couldn't really understand a lot of his motivations. He just kind of tucked in and tucked out whenever he felt like it, is what it seemed like to me at the time. So absolutely, all these different characters like you're talking about. Pippin was my favorite growing up because I was Pippin. I was that little kid who was always getting in trouble. I have ADHD, so that's a big part of it. I didn't know how to keep my hands off things or stay out of trouble. So I loved Pippin's story because it's really to use a literary term, it's a Bildungsroman. He's an immature kid, and throughout the story he grows into a young man who's had responsibility and experiences in life. And I really identified with that story so much. That's what made him my favorite character.
We're getting some great questions from the chat for you. But before I get to it, guys, I've got breaking news. Cliff hates it when I have breaking news, and I haven't told him about this, but I think it's pretty widely known right now.
What now? What could it possibly be now?
It looks like the breaking news is Jeff Bezos has announced that he's not going to be CEO of Amazon anymore. He's leaving his job. In this job market, it's a challenging job market right now. So Jeff, good luck to you. No, Jeff Bezos has announced that by the third quarter of this year, October time, he's not going to be CEO of Amazon anymore, and he's just going to be chairman, kind of like Robert Iger is for Disney. This is huge. This is huge. Like, Jeff Bezos personally negotiated with the Tolkien estate. We wouldn't be getting more Lord of the Rings anything or Second Age anything and stories from the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales without him personally negotiating with the family, who has been very strict on
Now
letting other
we
people
are
create and
raising
explore.
we are perhaps raising that to the point of folklore now. I wonder how directly responsible there was between an executive decision of Jeff Bezos. I assume that he was a very large motivating factor, um, because of his fandom, of his level of fandom. But I wonder if one of the main pillars behind the whole effort is now no longer there. I don't know what that means. I don't know what to ascribe to this at this early point. Hmm.
What's your first reaction to this news, Luke?
So I kind of have a mixed reaction to it. Um, because he did say he's like stepping aside to still be like head of the board, and in his announcement I think he said to spend more time on the projects he cares about. So who knows, maybe that frees him up to spend more time on this production. But at the same
Hmm.
time, I think
Hmm.
it could go either way. He could be wanting to have more personal time. So I don't know which way to lean
Well,
at this point.
I can
Yeah,
answer that
he's
for
a
you.
single guy now. He's a
Yeah,
single
I can
guy
answer
now,
that for
right?
you.
So he's ready to get out to the world again, I guess.
He's single. He recently bought one of the biggest houses in Los Angeles. Paid one of the most expensive prices for a house ever. He moved to Los Angeles.
Hmm.
He's newly single, divorced. His wife got half, as she should, and she is one of the greatest philanthropists and most giving philanthropists in the world right now. But Jeff is has told people that we hear that he really wants to live the Hollywood producer playboy lifestyle, and by owning the biggest franchise outside of Star Wars, and he's a huge
Hmm.
Lord of the Rings buff, and he's personally negotiated this contract. This probably means he's gonna get more hands on, which could be read either way. Either he
Really? Is
recognized
he trying to move himself into a Kevin Feige level type of profile position?
it sounds like he wants to play in Hollywood. He moved to LA, he wants to be here, and Lord of the Rings is going to be the biggest thing in the history of television, just by budget alone. So the question, I guess the question to you guys is, we've heard that
Hmm.
the production has had its troubles early on. Do you think Jeff Bezos is going to dive deeper into Middle Earth now?
So
I'll let you go first, Luke, because I don't know.
yeah, we're in rampant speculation territory. Let's just be clear. I don't think anyone knows anything. um,
I would, you know
but
what, guys? I would wait for a press release to come out. Watch what happens in the next couple of months when we would normally be hearing about convention season and big convention announcements. And instead, I think we should keep our eyes on the horizon within that time frame when there's going to be a convention level announcement about Jeff Bezos moving in like Kevin Feige style to become overseer or take on a title of executive producer or something.
Well, let me ask you this. Great question from the chat. Thank you, Jill. Jill asks, guys, this isn't going to matter. Just get on with it. Is she right?
All right.
to an
And
extent, I share that sentiment. Yeah.
yes, that's just as likely as anything. Yes, absolutely. That's
All right.
Yeah.
absolutely
So
just as likely a truth as anything. Yes.
so at
He's
the
probably. Go ahead.
at the chance of infuriating some billionaire apologists, there is some extent to which this is replacing a billionaire with a millionaire, and we're just going to move on with our lives. So,
Right. Well, I think this increases our chances, Cliff, of meeting Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the history of the world, one day.
What if he wants to do a roundtable interview, then that'd be great. That would be more than awesome. And we would like to romanticize this story. I would like to, but I'll be honest with my audience, I have no reason to, but I would really like to, in my mind, romanticize this relationship that Jeff Bezos has with Tolkien is a lot like the way a lot of us feel. Maybe it's how Stephen Colbert feels when he spends all of his time listening to the Tolkien Professor podcast in between working on his show. And when you are interviewing all these extraordinary young people from different places to get their love out into the open, how they love and connect to Tolkien. Maybe I would like to tell myself that Jeff had a reason to say, since I'm sitting on all this money, and I just noticed that Game of Thrones shows very strongly that The Return of the King won 11 out of 11 awards, and Game of Thrones was huge. And now he's thinking, let's go back to the best of high fantasy, and the very best of the best is J.R.R. Tolkien when it comes to high romantic fantasy. And maybe he was just looking at the golden goose, and since he's nobody's fool, maybe he recognized a great opportunity when he saw it because of his own personal passion.
Well,
I would like to think romantically, but I really have no reason to do that. I mean, the other cynical part of me could just as easily say, look at the money grab, and don't we hope to God that they don't punch holes, irreparable holes in the fabric of Arda. I mean, we're all in the same boat in this position where it could be half of one, six a dozen of another. You know what I'm saying?
well, let me reposition that framing. I don't think we should care what the motivations are of the richest man in the history of the world. I want to know what you guys think. He's obviously one of the smartest men ever, and everyone that has ever met him, talked to him, worked with him, has said he's just really smart. Obviously, he gained the trust of the Tolkien family and the Tolkien estate, and there is something to be said about that, isn't there?
Mm, actually, I have the most cynical outlook. I don't want to be too cynical, but I mean, it's the after Christopher stepped away and retired, that was when all the wheeling and dealing really started. There was there was something about Professor Tolkien's availability in the marketplace, and there was a whole new separation of church and state that had diminished when Christopher Tolkien retired from his position. And by that I mean there would be less resistance to the very strict and very specific outlook that Christopher felt was important in keeping his father's legacy, his literary work, his linguistic success as an academic. All of that was much more important to him. Uh, really, don't you think that that was really the litmus test that uh, Luke was Christopher's direct guardianship suddenly changing hands, and then all of a sudden there were new toys and new merchandise deals that suddenly entered the atmosphere very quickly. Did you notice that?
So I think first and foremost we have to say, yeah, Christopher Tolkien did a fantastic job preserving and protecting his father's legacy, and that often came down to being very taking a very guardianship role of the property rights as much as possible. I think to an extent they were kind of encouraged into that position with the way that the rights for The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit were treated, and the way that those rights were handled after they gave away some or sold away some of those rights. Um, and so I do think that they were very cautious with giving extra rights away, selling extra rights away. Um, Although Tolkien himself, in his notes, said, either do it right or pay me lots of money, either way. So Tolkien himself was not opposed to making
Exactly.
deals if the deal was there. um,
Exactly. That's why the chapter in his biography is called Cash. The Humphrey Carpenter biography. Yeah.
And so I think, yes, I think Christopher definitely wanted to protect his father and his father's legacy. I personally don't want to read too much into the timing of Christopher Tolkien stepping down and the deal happening, because this trust has always had like a board, and granted, Christopher was the head of that board. He was even if he wasn't the head, he was probably around when those conversations were happening. And I don't foresee it being kind of an ousting, which it might have to have been in order for Christopher to leave that abruptly before a deal was made. I just don't see that happening. So I see it as pretty coincidental, but also I think he was probably around when the conversations were happening.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. I think Christopher was involved, and at that point in his life, he's looking at what is his legacy. What is he leaving to the world beyond what he edited of his father's works. So I think the Amazon deal is as much Christopher's gift to the world as it is the rest of the family, right? And although the money was there, yeah, I've never felt like this was a cash grab by the family. This was who is going to be the best steward of these stories, and how do we maintain its relevancy going on the next 100 years, right? And because we're 80 years after The Hobbit by now, so
the answer to that question is to expand the story into places where Professor Tolkien never actually got to specifically go, except for a few drafts of ideas and a few manuscripts that were only edited and presented to us posthumously years later. This is the most unique adaptation that can possibly come about, because all the other adaptations we've ever seen were from the very, very familiar books of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. We've never had an adaptation that went somewhere else. And so this is why everyone is really sitting upright, completely paying attention to what's going on. That's why the anticipation is so high. And that might be the smartest thing that they ever did, was to choose the Second Age and the very rich tapestry of history and events that all directly tie into the familiar Third Age characters. This might be the smartest move, instead of the early reporting that we had about young Aragorn being the driving story, which was at the time the truth. Everybody in the writer's room must have sat down, and after several months, they decided to go into Numenor and to talk about Anatar and Rings of Power and Gil-galad and Celebrimbor and the War of Sauron and the Elves. Oh gosh, what does that mean? We have a chance to depict Moria in the height of its glory. Oh, and then all the light bulbs just started going off, all at the same time. I bet you everybody in the writer's room was like, yes, this is the eucatastrophe that we want. As Tolkien would say, this is the big thing that we have to take advantage of, is this unexplored narrative.
Well,
there is no novel of the Second Age. There's no novel that Tolkien finished in his lifetime that tells us this story. Don't you think, Luke, that this is absolutely the height of anticipation?
I think that it is a good move. I will put in a little bit of a qualifier there. It's the first filmic adaptation or video adaptation to do this, because Lord of the Rings Online has kind of explored this area. They have kind of flashbacks and things like that, and they have pushed out their Third Age map now into areas that the Lord of the Rings doesn't cover. So I think it is a really, really good opportunity, like you're saying, and it does leave the door open to so many possibilities that it does keep us guessing as fans and as people interested in adaptation and Tolkien in general. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? Because they just have the skeletons to work with. They can inflesh the story and clothe the story any way they want.
Well, that leads into the topic of conversation that brought us all together today. Earlier today, I tweeted out a fun little thing, and which we'll get Cliff's response to in a second. There's a whole culture on the internet and on social media, especially on Reddit. They created a whole subreddit called Thanos Did Nothing Wrong in the lead up to Avengers Endgame. And, this concept of like Thanos was just looking out for the health and well-being of the universe, and we were over-consuming. The universe was being over-consumed by the population, so snap half of them out. And so there was this whole thing. It got so much momentum, that the filmmakers got involved, and then the community built, and it became this huge thing on Reddit. And then they got Josh Brolin, like a few weeks before Endgame came out. Josh Brolin posted a video of him snapping, and then they banned half the people of the subreddit. So it became this like cultural moment. So Thanos did nothing wrong, and there's arguments to that effect. I tweeted today from the One Ring, Thanos did nothing wrong. Vader's the hero of his own story. Why shouldn't we be excited about Sauron? And Cliff, I saw your text to me as soon as you saw that tweet. What was your first reaction to that?
Don't put me on the spot, Justin. All right then. This is what it was. I had to stop making my lunch and actually stop and say, wait a minute. I'm now automatically thrown into this conversation that I didn't even want to speculate on in the first place. But all right, since we're here now, and fine. Let's just make this a little, like we're sitting around the fireplace, having a couple of drinks and speculating. There is a type of storytelling in popular culture, especially looking at Anakin and the prequels, and the success of the animated Clone Wars, which has led to this wild popularity of The Mandalorian, and oh gosh, Ahsoka, and everyone's all wild about it. Everyone is wildly enthusiastic about that type of story, where you're looking at an antagonist to understand him better and to kind of sympathize with them. It happened with Gregory Maguire and a very famous little book that he did called Wicked. And in this novel, we decided to take all of our energy and all of our attention and look at the antagonist, the Wicked Witch of the West, completely humanizing her in the character of Elphaba, and looking at her young life and all of her Harry Potter-esque experiences. Now, I understand. I get it. I get it that we all want to look at the success of the Disney villainous board games. Everyone loves to, root for the villains every now and then. I kind of understand. But that was never the way in Tolkien. We were never rooting for the villains in The Hobbit. We never, ever rooted for, we were puzzled and perhaps dismayed at the betrayal of Saruman.
Let me interrupt you there. You just said something. You just said Tolkien never wanted us to root for the bad guy. But let me posit this: the book, The Hobbit, the book title is the hero of the story, right? Although the story is about a bunch of dwarves, and the movies became more about the dwarves than the Hobbit. Let's just be honest, right? But the Hobbit is about the Hobbit, right? A Hobbit. Mm-hmm. So when he publishes his magnum opus of a story, out of everything that he can call it, he calls it The Lord of the Rings. And we all know who the Lord of the Rings is. There is only one Lord of the Rings. That is he called the book Lord of the Rings. That's what the Amazon accounts are called, Lord of the Rings on Prime. We're
Okay, all
talking
right.
about Sauron.
He more properly could have named his story "The Gardener of the Bagginses," and that would have been probably the most appropriate title, because this is about Samwise. The whole story is about Samwise, and I'm gonna stand on that hill. I'm gonna plant my flag on that hill and fight the good fight, because there's a reason why Samwise is written the way he's written, and I wrote this huge essay about it years and years ago. It's all about Sam. But
Well,
okay,
yeah,
look,
Tolkien
the
explicitly
Lord of the
says
Rings.
the hero of the story is Sam. He said that in the letters.
But
But
in hold on, in looking at the Red Book of Westmarch, isn't it properly called the Lord of the Rings and the War of the Ring? Luke, isn't that the way that Frodo and Bilbo
So,
wrote it in the Red Book?
so which
I have to
title?
go look.
There are
The
something like
title that the
7
hobbits
titles that have
wrote.
been crossed out on the cover of the Red Book. So
Oh,
I
right.
can make a better case for rooting for the villain than the title, and it's one of the central characters in the later text, Gollum. Gollum
Hmm.
is a villain, but at the same time, we are led to root for his salvation at one point when he comes upon Sam and Frodo, and they're laying there asleep, and he comes and he reaches out as if to touch them, and then Sam wakes up and snaps at him. But in that moment, we root for Gollum. We want Gollum to recognize what he's done and to want to be part of their group. So I think that Tolkien understands the motivation, and I think that he employs it to some extent. We kind of see how Frodo sees himself in Gollum, and Bilbo saw himself in Gollum, and so as we're rooting for those main
Hmm.
characters, we're also rooting for Gollum, um, and so we see different phases of this evolution towards the bad side. Very early on, we see Boromir being tempted. So we have all these different iterations that we can root for a character who is falling rather than fallen.
so don't
But
you?
I get that. I totally get that. It has been said by quite a few adroit observers here in our live chat and on our message boards um, that in his initial phase, Sauron's greatest interest, especially when he was partly trying to redeem himself after the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age, and he was trying to come correct. Sauron's chief interest was in creating order and perfection in Middle Earth, and he fell back into thinking about his older, evil, Morgoth influenced ways because he sensed that the Valar had abandoned Middle Earth. And that's why Sauron got kind of uppity and got back into his britches again to create his own sense of order and impose his own order and perfection in his mind. Is
Well,
that
let's
too
and
let's
far off?
bring this back
Hold on,
to.
Luke, is that too far off?
well, I was just going to say Tolkien builds on this theme and revisits it in Lord of the Rings. That's exactly what Saruman promised to Gandalf, to bring order, just like they had always wanted to do, but to use the ring to do it.
Right, right on.
Mhm.
Bring this back to fans and fan expectations. It's so we can't. First off, on the Red Book Westmarch, history is written by the winners, and that Red Book was written by the winners. But we know there's more to the story, always. So there's been this trend, like you said, with Wicked and with Thanos and with everybody screaming in excitement about finally seeing Vader kill a hallway full of people, and then finally seeing Luke kill a hallway full of people. Like it's just or things. There's and there's just been a cultural trend for people wanting to humanize. I don't know if that's the right word. The bad guy or the antagonist. So, do we
Well, look at the
want?
popularity of Loki. Look at the wild popularity of Loki. And Don't you think that that pop culture energy is going to play into how Anatar is represented? I think it will.
Do we want? Do fans want to uh, know Sauron on a deeper level and see and see the emotions that he goes through and maybe fall in love with Sauron like they did with Loki, or because the sense I get is that there's a strong set of fans that just that's the big bad guy. Let him stay the big bad guy. They don't want to deal with humanizing Sauron, but
Well,
I feel
then
like
they
that's
need to read the
the
Silmarillion. They need to read the back pages of the Silmarillion. That's all. They just have to
So
read what Tolkien wrote.
I I see that motivation, and you're absolutely right. There are parts of the fandom that want to humanize all the characters because to them that represents a real kind of depth to the writing. It makes a more well-rounded character if we can understand motivations enough to understand why they do the things they do. Um, the way that Lord of the Rings was originally written and put out, if we don't have the Silmarillion as backstory, um, Sauron doesn't have enough backstory to give motivation to what he's doing. He's just evil. But at the same time, evil is not simple in the Lord of the Rings because of the ring. I think it was Tom Shippey who once wrote that if evil was just an external force, there would be no drama in the Lord of the Rings. The ring has to tempt good characters to do bad things, but also we have to have external evil. So Tolkien very much plays with this back and forth between internal temptations, external influences, those kinds of things. And I think that can be expanded on in a way that a more modern adaptation can take the Sauron character with that skeleton, like we were talking about from the Silmarillion, and really inflesh him, give him a different lens that we can look at him. And I really do see this as an important motivation because you have to remember that there are fans who have felt um, like their story has never been told, like they are from. I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. That in the history of Tolkien fandom or in the history of science fiction fandom, fantasy fandom, their story hasn't been heard. And so sometimes they reach out to humanize a character in the story that has never been humanized in order to try and see if that makes a space for them in the fandom. Una McCormick, who's actually a New York Times bestselling author, actually is an excellent scholar as well, and she has a chapter all about how women write fan fiction of the Lord of the Rings in order to write themselves into the story. So they can actually experience it in ways that they weren't written into the story by Tolkien necessarily. And this isn't bashing Tolkien and saying his women aren't excellent, but he didn't write the kinds of women that they wanted to see in the story because it was more like them. And so that's why they're writing the fan fiction. I think that this can be the same kind of motivation. Let's humanize a character that we haven't seen humanized before. And maybe it makes a space for someone new in the fandom.
great comments and questions. Great stuff in the chat room. I love the dialogue that's happening. But Cliff, I'll go to you with this. Sean in the chat room says, "I do want to know more about Sauron, but I won't be rooting for him." And my question to you is, with that comment, I don't think Amazon would be doing Sauron justice if we didn't end up rooting for him in some capacity.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to root for someone for them to be a deeply fascinating character that still has the power to impart a moral lesson. Look at Saruman. You are endlessly fascinated at who he's trying to double cross, what he thinks he's ultimately going to do, and how could he have betrayed all of the guardians of the West and those who are faithful to the Valar. You will get a lot of this exploring the strife on the island of Numenor as the Second Age is going to probably give us that same type of storytelling where you feel bad ultimately for people who are being manipulated by Sauron. And you have to find probably some better characters that you are rooting for. The men and the women of Numenor, I'd like to see how much we root for them, only to see them fall at the end to Sauron's wiles. I don't think that Sauron is going to be able to take a place in the narrative the way that other characters will. We'll be rooting, remember all the experiences you have watching Thanos and thinking, oh my gosh, he's a bloodthirsty, psycho, narcissistic tyrant, and that's putting it nicely.
And
And
that's a
you're
tyrant
not.
I can follow.
No, you are not. You're not ever sitting in the audience thinking, I hope he gets away with it. The powerful effect of the movie Infinity War is that he does get away with it at the end, and it shocked everybody, and everyone was just blown away at that. So,
Well, another question from the chat. Let's throw this to Luke. Can Sauron be evil without reason?
So he could be. I mean, you could absolutely portray that. I don't know that that would be interesting. Like
Is that true to
the
Tolkien?
no,
well, if you're dealing with, depends on what you mean. If are you asking if not giving any motivation to Sauron is true to Tolkien, or if you're asking um, for him to not have motivation? It is if you read part of the story. If you stop reading after Lord of the Rings and you don't go read the Silmarillion, there is background to be explored there. So it would absolutely be true to Tolkien to give more of that backstory. The one thing I think is interesting is there are certainly groups of people that if they know the end of the book, they won't enjoy the journey to get there. And that's the kind of trouble you run into with things like the Star Wars prequels or this kind of venture, if this is the story of Sauron, of Anatar. They can't root for that character because they know what happens, and they can't invest in that character because eventually they'll feel betrayed by them. But there are other fans who will root for the character because they want so bad for that thing to not happen, that turning to the badness to not happen. And they'll see the humanness of the character before they turn to evil. And so I do think it's an interesting thing to play with. I don't know how much they'll go back and forth there. But really almost the only character I can think of that is evil without any kind of backstory humanizing that's interesting or compelling enough was from No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. Like, it is just so
mm,
postmodern, it is ridiculous, and I don't think they would do that. And as for your
mm.
question, is Sauron the protagonist we want? Well, I don't know, but is he the protagonist we deserve?
Another
Yeah, that
another
might be
question.
true.
Another another question from the chat room. This one was really good. I kind of feel like humanizing Sauron will detract from the very archetypal theme of light versus dark and good versus evil. Do you think humanizing Sauron reduces those themes that are so strong and so powerful in the Lord of the Rings trilogy?
Yes, I honestly don't think that's worth going down. That narrative path doesn't yield as much fruit as, say, looking at the ongoing difficulties and harm that Sauron brings to the free peoples of Middle Earth, and we want to be rooting for them. I think they want to build this story about rooting for the Southrons or the Easterlings, that we can root for them in hopes that the blue wizards might appear and unstick some of the effectiveness of Morgoth's influence and Sauron continuing to utilize fear and worship of the shadow to destroy the hearts of men in all those regions. I think the better yield of the narrative for a TV show that wants to go on for 4 or 5 or even 6 television seasons, I think they'll get a much greater yield out of letting us be sympathetic to the characters who get suckered into the evil promises of Sauron / Anatar. Those people who get duped are the ones we're going to feel the most empathy for. And Sauron is going to be running away with the wagon and the jewels and everything because we know what happens in the Second Age. The absolute big finale, if they went to really get $1 billion worth of entertainment, they went to show us Numenor in its glory and then in its decline, right to its massive destruction in the end of season 5. And everybody will be screaming for more. And there will be primetime Emmys on everybody's desk. I'm telling you, that's probably where they're going to go with that.
So should Sauron maintain being the antagonist in Amazon's show?
You're gonna see him bring darkness to people of Numenor who would otherwise have stayed away from the darkness. You're gonna see him travel to like they said in the synopsis that they just leaked a couple of weeks ago. They're gonna go to the furthest reaches of the map. They're literally telling us that Sauron's influence is going to be into all these hitherto unknown distant regions of Middle-earth. So I think that the yield of the most fruitful narrative you can get is us as viewers sympathizing with those people who get suckered and destroyed by the lies of Sauron. Don't you think? Am I crazy for thinking that?
Well, but he's got to be a likable character because he gives 18 rings away to the most powerful people of all races. Like he's got to be a nice guy in some capacity.
Oh God!
I mean, you don't really have to be nice to give a bribe. Bribes work even if you're not particularly nice.
So you're telling me Sauron is more like, look, if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, like Baelish, like Peter Baelish, like that guy that just always has 10 deals going on and you can never trust what he's doing because he's got 7 other side things going on. Like no one ever trusted Baelish.
So I think we can make this character more interesting than just blanket bad. I think if you can have them be like a deceiver, a crafty deceiver, something like an Iago to Othello or a Jafar to Aladdin, something like kind of twisting in and out and making suggestions, things like that. But also, you can actually have a human doing those things. Like he can be, he can have ambition, he can have a lot of pride, all those kinds of things. But he can also love someone at the same time. Why can't he have a more diverse character like that? Why can't he be interested in more than one thing? And in terms of, does having this micro level complexity muddy up the macro level light versus dark? Did having the complexity of Gollum muddy up the light versus dark in Lord of the Rings? No, it didn't. We could have both. You can have both and. It's not an either or dichotomy here. Because in all literature, in all film, you add up the snippets to create a theme. And so if you have someone whose overarching goals are not very enviable, but they do have some softer or more interesting or more humanizing parts of themselves, you're not going to think, oh, that's a great person, I want to be friends with them. But you're going to understand them a lot more than you would if they were just completely bad through and through.
Well, let me ask you this then. The last time we took a bad guy and we told his backstory through Little Annie, did that, in Star Wars prequels, did that change your perspective and your love of Vader? And now that we're doing it again with Little Annie?
only after the influence of Dave Filoni and his storytelling with the animated series. It was not with the prequel films that I felt entirely sympathetic to Anakin. Not entirely. It was not until Dave Filoni got his hands on the project and made years and years and years worth of very satisfying and intelligent storytelling in that universe for the sake of developing what Lucas did not with Anakin. And I hope that I got some Star Wars fans around to back me up on that. But let's take a look at Sauron refusing to go and submit himself to the judgment of the Valar, even though one of the Maiar comes and specifically tells Sauron after the War of Wrath, it's time for you to go back to Valinor, and he doesn't do it. That might be one of the most interesting personality prisms to look at Sauron as a character in the very, very early Second Age who is motivated by guilt and fear himself, and how it destroys anything that could have possibly remained within him that could have been an alignment with Arda and the greater good of Arda. What do you think?
So I do think that's an interesting place to explore. To go back to the question about the Star Wars prequel films, I would hope that the lesson of the prequel films is learned, that you can't take a villain of one of the most successful movie franchises in history and in 3 films really try to diagnose that character in a way that changes everyone's mind about them. It was successful for some, and some people really enjoyed the films, but a lot of people that I talked to felt just like you did, Cliff, about they needed more time, they needed more development in order to believe that story and invest in that story. And particularly when you're balancing that character's story, Anakin's story, with the Obi-Wan story and the Padme story, where you're trying to develop all these characters because you have to, because you're in that world, but that's less and less time than that you can spend to developing Anakin as a character. So hopefully, now that we have seasons and seasons of a show, that gives us a lot more time. I think I was listening to the Tolkien professor on an interview recently saying, the movie is the short story. The TV show is where you can actually dig into like a chapter book. And I think they tried to do too much too quickly with Anakin in the prequel films. Now, that being said, I don't have anything against the prequel films. I think they are enjoyable, but I don't hold them up to be some epic, marvelous piece of filmmaking.
Mm, mm, that's fair. That's totally fair. In fact, that's kind of generous. I mean, hey, I love the art department. I love the design of the worlds in the prequels. I have a great deal of enjoyment looking at the Machiavellian plot that, Darth Sidious slash Palpatine endeavored. We're always interested in Palpatine because, look, he manipulated a bunch of people and managed to create a clone army behind everybody's back, and nobody knew that he was going to use them as the ultimate power grab tool. And okay, and so there's something about Anatar and Sauron we applied directly to Sidious slash Palpatine. And maybe we should let that comparison, bake in the oven at 450 degrees for 20 minutes before we take it out again. But I do find it interesting that Sauron would go to such lengths to politically influence people and different nations and races around Middle-earth, and then go into all the extra trouble to make magic rings and the essence of ring craft and ring lore. He literally teaches his secret weapon to all of the elves, and Sauron gives that information away to the elves, teaches them the craft. And here comes Celebrimbor, and just manipulating the heck out of these people for his own secret stuff that he wants. It's going to be very, very much a comparison frequently made that the Sidious Palpatine relationship to this Sauron Anatar character will be forefront in our minds as we go forward.
Cliff, someone in the chat room brought up a name that maybe is most applicable. Magneto.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, antagonist.
Well,
obviously on the wrong side of history, but with extremely valid reasons and a great backstory that but explains how he, becomes. Is Magneto kind of a good kind of
Mm,
poll to watch.
maybe, but Darth Sidious and Palpatine and even Sauron do not have that backstory. They're not humanized like that at all, are they? I don't know about that.
Well, back to our question: should Sauron be humanized? Because I think he's going to be, whether we like it or not. So, what can we compare to that we enjoy?
To me, I
Uh,
think whether we're intended to root for him or not, I want to see a complex character in Sauron. I think that's
mm,
something that would be enjoyable. And really, what I think would be interesting is to have that kind of Darth Sidious side to him, but I also want to see the worm tongue side of him. I also want to see him making suggestions to other rulers, to follow the train back from worm tongue to the Iago from Othello, all the way back to Unferth in Beowulf. I want to see
hmm
that advisor to the king role that he has as Anatar sometimes. I want to see that come out and see, like you're talking about, not only does he play the political game as a player, a power player in politics, he also plays the political game personally by making some suggestions in people's ears and that kind of thing. And I think you could make him an interesting character by giving him dynamic range in that way. How does he play that game? Does he fluctuate between those two parts of his personality? I think that's a different way to make his character more complex.
That's a
I'm
great
down.
point.
I'm down for that. Look, I don't want to humanize Sauron too much because, you know, come on. There's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of intriguing psychology and a lot of metaphysics. That was, of course, Professor Tolkien's primary interest. But I want to see a complex character, but I don't want to see us looking at him as a victim in any way whatsoever, except as a victim of his own choices and his own paradigm that he follows himself. I don't want to have a Sauron who I sympathize with as a victim in any way whatsoever, because deliberately he had a chance after the War of Wrath to walk the straight and narrow, which may be more of a Catholic representation than I intended it to be. But look, I will be forgiven for that. I want to see Sauron not in that sympathetic way that he was a victim of anything, but making the worst possible choices, step after step, deluded by whatever is deluding him to make him do what he does. And Tolkien gives us plenty of that in the Silmarillion and in other places as well. I can't help but notice bookshelf in the back of your room, Luke. I can see every little Ballantine books paperback right there on that shelf. I can recognize every edition that you have. There's Unfinished Tales. I can see it right there.
Mhm.
All right, so
Great.
you don't want sympathetic Sauron, but do we deserve sexy Sauron?
Well, you're going to get that by default. You're going to get that. What do you
And
think, Luke?
I think sexy Sauron is true to Tolkien.
It might be. It might be. I mean, he goes knocking around like the Avon lady, and everybody says no. We don't want to deal with you. He goes knocking at Lindon, and Gil-galad will not even agree to let his emissaries come in the border of their lands. And Elrond says no, and he goes wandering around trying to futz around and mess with everybody. By the time he gets to Celebrimbor, I think that, I speculate he might have glammed himself up a bit or whatever it took to get somebody's attention. By the time he gets to Eregion, people want to sit down and have a cup of tea with him and make magic rings all of a sudden. I'm interested in that process. How did that happen?
So back to I got a lot of flack this weekend for comparing Captain America picking up Thor's hammer with Sauron wielding the full power of the One Ring, which we have not yet seen on screen yet. And rightfully so, people were said, look, you're comparing the good guys using good power versus seeing the bad guy use ultimate bad power. But with Wicked and with everything else, there just seems to be a cultural trend for want to see the bad guy go full bad. And we have not seen we've seen a flaming eyeball on a tower. We have yet to see Sauron be
Look,
Sauron.
Justin, I know how much you want to see Sauron as a Hannibal Lecter type of character, but you gotta stop. It's not gonna happen. He's not the Hannibal that you're rooting for while he's being horrendous. That's not it. Help me out,
Well,
Luke.
to use a different comparison, I might not want to root for him, but I might want to see why everyone else is afraid of him. Like for
Exactly.
Boba Fett. For Boba Fett, I want to know why, for so long, we were given that Boba Fett was the deadliest bounty hunter. And lo and behold, spoilers alert, that was in one of the recent Star Wars. So there might be this desire to see, okay, why did we really have to keep the ring from Sauron? What was so bad that we had to keep it away from him? I would go with that, but I don't know that I don't know that I want to see him put on the ring so that things will be the way they're supposed to be necessarily.
Well, we're even going to have an effort of subterfuge on the part of Celebrimbor, where he makes the executive decision to make additional rings without Anatar knowing anything about it. And if you follow that logically, then that narrative is going to have to explore why Celebrimbor had that mistrust. Or, and we're going to be hearing a lot about, I think the ghost of Feanor will obviously be in the room as we get to these scenes with the rings of power being made and these secrets being kept from one another. I'm pretty keen on that. And yes, Sauron can be very complex, but
when he
I'm not
creates
going to be rooting for him to win.
Doesn't Sauron pour all his malice and energy into the One Ring to his personal detriment? Doesn't he lose a part of him into the ring that he never regains?
Yes, and that's exactly why J.K. Rowling borrowed so heavily with that concept of the Horcruxes. That's exactly why.
All right, so let me ask you a couple things, and these are wild rumors that have no basis in anything, but we've heard just whispers from the set. Green Dragon gossip time. All right, it's time for Green Dragon gossip. Okay.
Our
So
final
we're talking about
segment of the show,
Sauron.
folks.
We're talking about humanizing Sauron. Number one, Galadriel in the films. If Amazon's show is in the same universe as Peter Jackson's films, Galadriel in the Hobbit movies is the only one with the power. Like, she knows something about Sauron enough, and she has a power enough to banish him. Like, she's the one that steps up. The question is, the rumors are in Amazon's show, there's a chance hot young Anatar Sauron has a fling with yet to be married Galadriel. Is that kosher? Is it true to Tolkien? Like, why wouldn't he? He gains her trust. He gains her trust and gives her a ring. So,
Well,
is it too far-fetched?
Galadriel? I thought Tolkien described her as being very suspicious of him. I mean, right?
Galadriel's pretty suspicious of most romantic advances. If you have read your Silmarillion, Feanor. So like the list is long of people who have tried to be with Galadriel and she was not having it. So, I mean, it's possible. It's not really in the text.
No, I think I don't like that idea at all. I don't like the idea at all of Anatar trying to romantically influence his way to get his evil schemes done. If Tom Miarvolo Riddle, also known as I Am Lord Voldemort, if he didn't use romantic entanglements to get the job done, and just stuck with evil, necromancy, and all that stuff. Stay in your lane, please. Stay in your lane, Amazon Studios. We don't
Well,
we don't need
maybe not Galadriel.
extrapolations. No, no,
Maybe not
no,
Galadriel, but could
no.
Sauron use the influence of interpersonal relationships to distribute some of these rings and try to gain influence through the leaders of all these cultures of men, elves, and dwarves? And uh, not to go too woke, but it doesn't have to be heterosexual relationships. Like could Sauron's influence, as beautiful as he is, lead to relationships? And are we prepared for that?
I'm not prepared for that. I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, I've thought about how Anatar will be presented as Loki. I've often thought of that in my mind as a baseline equation. People have heard me say that for a
Loki
couple of
gets some
years, at
action,
least.
though. Let's be honest. Loki gets action.
When in the MCEU does that happen? Point out to when that happens once.
Okay, you know what? What did
Once.
you think of the implied stuff between Gandalf and Galadriel at the end of The Hobbit? Like there was like
That
they're touching hands at the end.
that wasn't
Like, come with me,
that
my
wasn't
lady.
implied. It was only implied because we got to see all this behind the scenes, uh, blooper videos of them flirting and rolling around on each other on the floor. That was all behind the scenes stuff. That's what we were projecting. Come on. I mean, when I see Galadriel interact with Gandalf and call him Mithrandir, and the way she specifically refers to him as a very, very affectionate relationship that she would have had with any of the other Maiar spirits that she was certainly friends with back when she lived in Aman, way, way, way back in the First Age. Don't you think? She must have been uh, deeply friendly and informal with such beings after being around them for thousands of years. And how unique that all those centuries and thousands of years later, there's a manifestation of a Maiar as this withered old man who is so strikingly influenced by Odin mythology, with Odin dressing up as a gray wanderer who would show up and see how people would interact with him. I mean, there's something very proper about the way Galadriel is interacting with Gandalf. I never saw that as flirty or romantic.
Okay.
Well, I think you're right that they've been around for so long that they can't stand on ceremony with each other. I don't think that would work very well. And also, you have to remember that Galadriel had one Maiar living next to her in Saruman, basically, and one that
Mm.
she didn't know about living next to her in the Balrog. So, she's been around them for much longer than some people in Middle Earth, and so I really think that of course there's going to be a fondness there for kind of recognizing a kindred spirit, almost, if you will, because she's been in her own area for so long that she only gets to visit with those Maiar that she knew on the other side, um, and it's kind of a rekindling, a revisiting of a relationship. Um, but if we're filling in gaps in Tolkien's work, if you've been around for thousands of years and somehow procreation is happening, there's a gap there that can be filled, in that there can be relationships written in that are not in the pre-existing text. Now, I'm not saying that I am gung-ho for a Galadriel anyone relationship, but I could see um, Sauron using wiles of some sort, because that is a part of being human, is that urge to be with someone, to have that intimacy with someone. And I could see him playing on that desire for intimacy, because to Tolkien, a lot of what evil is corruption of good things. What is it Frodo says? It cannot make, it can only mar. And so it's taking things that are and perverting them, twisting them in some way. And so I think it would very much be within the thematic thought of Tolkien to say he's going to take what would otherwise be a healthy sexual or intimate relationship and pervert it into something that is power driven, manipulative, not healthy. I think that would very much be within the themes of Tolkien. And the relationship itself, of course, would be apocryphal, extra-textual, not anywhere in Tolkien. But I could see that being interesting.
I could see Celeborn and attempting to have a courtship with Galadriel and Anatar coming in to get in the way. I could see him playing people against each other in that context, maybe.
Well, let me ask you this, and because someone brought up Tolkien's famous or infamous devotion and Catholicism, and how important is the very conservative teachings of the Catholic faith is in relation to how Amazon tells these stories moving forward, because every time we post any news about the new show, there's like comments of like, this is going to be woke, and woke is not Tolkien. So I guess the question is, was Tolkien woke?
Have you ever seen a bigger statement of multiculturalism in the late 20th century than you do in the actual fellowship and the people who make up the Fellowship of the Ring itself? It speaks a lot right there.
Well, this guy, I think the comment in the chat is related to what we're talking about now, which is personal relationships.
So
go ahead.
There are a lot of layers to this question, and it comes up often in my work and in people responding to scholarship, things like that. The first thing I would say is, if you're deriving what you think of Tolkien's religion from his letters, you have to keep in mind the caution that Verlyn Flieger gave us. She's a great scholar, and she said you have to remember who he's writing to. Because if anything, Tolkien also took into account his audience. That's what made him such a great writer. And so if he's writing to his publisher, he knows what his publisher wants to hear. If he's writing to someone who is Catholic, he's going to know what that Catholic wants to hear. And so you can't always say that everything he says in his letters is 100% true. And sometimes his letters actually contradict themselves. So let's just kind of set the letters to the side for now, okay? We'll come back to them later. If we're just looking at The Lord of the Rings, there are absolutely themes that resonate with a Catholic perspective. But Tolkien was very careful to not put any directly Catholic things in there. He did that intentionally because, like we were saying earlier, he wanted to avoid that kind of allegory. He wanted his text to be much more widely accessible to groups of people. And like Tom Shippey pointed out, exactly, like Tom Shippey pointed out, a scholar I mentioned earlier, he says, if Tolkien had written a purely Catholic work, he would not have been as well received as he is today, because other people wouldn't have seen those themes. So he keeps it very humanistic, very broad. So absolutely, Catholics can find something in his work that they love, but non-Catholics can too, and that's a wonderful thing. Especially if you want other people to appreciate the work of a Catholic, he's done it in a way that he can bring people who don't share his perspective into a text and enjoy it with him. And so I think that we can have adaptations of Tolkien's work that stay true to that humanistic theme of exactly what Cliff was saying earlier, bringing in a lot of different perspectives, supporting one another, loyalty, fidelity, those kinds of things, brotherhood, or sisterhood even, where we have people rallying together for a cause, those kinds of things. But I don't think that we want to make it a Catholic work per se. So if that's the question, I don't think that they're going to make it a Catholic work. If you want them to make it a conservative work, that's a bit of a different question. And if you want to know a bit more about Tolkien's perspective on conservatism, yes, you can look at his letters, but remember, keep in mind he does change what he says based on who he's writing to. But there's also a fantastic edited collection by Janet Brennan-Croft and Leslie Donovan. That's called Perilous and Fair: Women in the Works and Life of J.R.R. Tolkien. That doesn't deal with race, but it deals with the idea of gender and sexism and things like that, both in Tolkien's work and in his life. So, for instance, Tolkien was there when Oxford became a coeducational university. And so we have documentation of, did he work with women? Did he decide to not work with women? Did he support women? Those kinds of things. And that book explores both his biographical parts of his life as well as women in his work. So things like that are really, really good insight. And just kind of spoiler alert, Tolkien is a little bit more progressive than he's sometimes given credit for in that regard. He was certainly more progressive than C.S. Lewis at the time that was happening.
Look no further than his comments on collaborating with Pauline Baynes and others, just to scratch the surface a little bit there. But yes, that's a wonderful recommendation, Luke. I'll have to look that up myself.
People in the chat room are saying Lord of the Rings is not a Catholic work at all, even though Tolkien was Catholic, and I think that's a true statement. And just to round out that conversation, Tolkien was a devout Catholic. Catholics look to the church for guidance and morality, and so if Amazon's making new Lord of the Rings in the year 2020, we can look to what the platform is of the current Catholic Church in 2021. And you know what didn't the Pope just say something in the last couple months, like, love your gay son? And like, there are things that you don't think the Catholic Church are supporting that they do support. So this idea of woke, there won't be any gay characters in Lord of the Rings, because that wouldn't be true to Tolkien. It's not true. Not true then, and not true now. So as we round out this discussion, we started with Thanos did nothing wrong, and I think it's a humorous way to look at Thanos, right? Yeah, he's the bad guy, and we screamed aloud in the theater when he got his butt handed to him by the entire Marvel universe of characters. There's been equal number of memes or similar memes about Sauron was a job creator, created 10,000 jobs in Mordor, elevated the lowest of the low creatures, brought the Saruman under guidance from Sauron, brought the men out of the hills, and take back your villages. You won't be outcasts anymore. Do you think that through this show, we're going to get some what Twitter likes to call Sauron stans?
No, not like that. That's just a bunch of projection and nonsense.
So I think there's a difference between understanding and rooting for, and I think we've kind of walked that tightrope a little bit today. I think you can understand why Thanos made the choice he did and disagree with it. And I don't think you necessarily have to root for him, because basically Thanos is utilitarianism gone crazy. It's like, this is what's wrong with the world, this is my solution to it, and consequences be damned. Sorry if that's a curse. But you understand why he made the decision. You don't agree with it necessarily. But then at the same time, you can also think Thor went a little bit overboard with the way that he handled that situation. So I think there is a tightrope that you can walk between fawning over the villain or making the villain a bit more understandable to an audience. And I think with enough time and enough complex writing, we can make Sauron understandable in this particular setting. I don't know if we will ever get to a point where we're like rooting, like we can make it understandable for Sauron to be the way he is in the Third Age. I don't think we can necessarily get there, but I think we can get to a place of understanding for Sauron's actions in the Second Age over the course of this series.
It's going to be
Well,
quite an interesting dance. As always, it's the dance of art and commerce. And sometimes I just step back and say, my gosh, what unusual dancing partners they are.
well, I'm just excited to see how like the his final form as a ball of fire, an eye wreathed in flame. It's got to be some sort of punctual punishment, uh, based on how he lived his life in the Second Age. So I want to know what happens. I'm look forward to what happens. That is his ultimate form. Ultimate punishment is an eye on a tower. Like how does he get there? So it sounds like this conversation is we don't want to be we don't want to sympathize with Sauron. We don't want to make him a hero, but we want to understand, and we want to understand his motivations and how he accomplished some of the things that he did. And it's interesting without being uh, heroic.
No, no one would ever ascribe heroism to uh, Saruman. People are prepared to ascribe pity to a character like Feanor or Saruman, who starts off with the best of intentions and goes way far south, and it just goes to hell in a handbasket. Um, Sauron is an interesting, very, very, very interesting character to approach, as we've discussed in this past show. It's been a very vibrant and interesting relay of ideas. I'm very invigorated by this. But I'm telling you, the limit of my personal sympathies, I'm saving for the people that Sauron screws over. That's just me. That's just me.
Yeah, I agree with you that those people are definitely going to get the lion's share of sympathy because I mean, based on the story outline that we have, yeah, that's going to be where the tragedy lays for most of it. Um, I would
Mm,
love to see something like maybe in the first episode, like one of our focal characters has interaction with some person that we don't know the name of, and it's a positive interaction, and then later we find out maybe that that's Anatar, or that's
mm,
I think there are some subtle ways to suggest that there's a more interesting character here than we've seen in the books. Um,
mm,
that we don't have to necessarily want to have pity for that character.
mm.
I really liked the conversation about Gollum and how the more we knew about Gollum and the more we saw his backstory and the you know everything didn't make him any less than the evil that he was. As we close out the show, Luke, we've been asking everybody. Um, Amazon's Lord of the Rings, biggest show in the history of television, biggest budget ever. They're filming right now. Um, the information is getting leaked in trickles. So let me ask you this: what is, from your perspective, as you've worked with fans of all ages, what should be the next thing that either gets leaked or officially announced? What piece of information should Amazon let out?
So so I'm gonna do a visualization exercise here. If I am an executive at Amazon and I am trying to drum up as much excitement about the series as possible, I think what I do is I probably go ahead and leak one character name and three different actors it could be of various um, of various kind of backgrounds. Like, is it like we leak a name and we have an older actor, a younger actor, an actor somewhere in between, and let the speculation go wild about what is this character, and maybe maybe it just happens to be a character from the book because we already know what the surroundings are going to be. We already know the synopsis. We know where the cities are, the general timeline. So if we have a character name, can you imagine the kind of ramp up that would lead to? So if you leak that just like a 2-3 weeks before an expo or something like that, where you're going to reveal a lot more, can you imagine all the hoopla that that would generate leading up to a show?
Hmm. Indeed. Justin, I'm not hearing you.
This week, it's been reported independently by the biggest Brazilian Tolkien fan site and the up and coming YouTuber Fans Fellowship that Gladiator himself, Russell Crowe, is definitely in the show. So, question to you is: who do you think a caliber actor as Russell Crowe? What character should he be?
Oh man.
What's the
To,
first
to
name that came to mind?
well, to be honest, the first thing that came to mind was, oh man, not an established actor. I'm sorry, it's probably not the response you wanted, but to me, I love it when they have a lot of up and coming actors because I love it the way that they can really take on the role like that. Um, Honestly, if I am, I don't know. I'd have to think about that a bit longer. Oh gosh.
I've speculated that Russell Crowe might be our Farazan, but
Oh
who
yeah, that
knows?
would work.
But
It,
it's just as likely that he could be um, Gil Galad. Uh, but everyone likes to argue because he's got this big beard, this massive bushy beard, so that cuts the hypothesis that he would play an elf lord such as Gil Galad.
I
But
you know I
I
I
tell you
think
what,
he could be a dwarf king. It's like because I was listening to The Hobbit. I was watching The Hobbit this weekend. Richard Armitage has such a great commanding voice, and so just from an audible perspective, the Russell Crowe's voice and Richard Armitage's voice fall right in line to like there is another king. Maybe he's Durin himself. Who knows? Um, but that's something. Luke Shelton is a doctor of Tolkien studies, I guess. He is constantly researching and polling fans from around the world of all ages about Tolkien, and he's working with the Tolkien Society, and he is one of the foremost scholars on what we'd like to call Tolkien Twitter. And in many of the conversations, Luke, it's been a pleasure to finally have you on the show.
it has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun visiting with both of you.
thank you so kindly, Luke. Especially thank you for the previous invitation to participate in your work and to be part of the questions in that process. I came to several understandings about myself through that, so it was very rewarding. And so
Mm.
thank you, and thanks for coming. You are welcome to come and crash the show and come and chat with us anytime. There'll be a lot of fun and more speculations yet to come, I'm sure.
Well, I am so thankful to hear you say that it helped you cogitate through some things. I call it the Tolkien experience for a number of reasons. The Tolkien experience project is for people to come right through their experience. The Tolkien experience podcast is so that we can hear so many people's different responses, especially people who might have influenced us, whether those are scholars or fan community organizers like yourself. And really, everything I do is meant to be public facing because not only do I want the people who participate to have the opportunity to think about and share their own experience, but I want all the rest of us to really start to listen to other people's experience as a part of our own Tolkien experience. And so that's why I always end my podcast with saying, thank you so much for listening. And I hope that in some way we've contributed to your Tolkien experience. Because to me, this fan community is the Tolkien experience. It's Tolkien's legacy that he's left behind for us. And whether that's through the books or coming to it through the films or through video games, whatever that is, you're a part of this community. You're a part of the Tolkien experience for those people around you. So yeah, if you are in the sharing mood at any point, absolutely love to see you guys participating in the Tolkien experience.
Thank you so kindly. That's really wonderful of you.
You're all
Thank
a part
you.
of this world.
We are, and it's worth fighting for.
All right, Cliff, take us out.
Well, I want to encourage everybody to look at Luke Shelton. Where can we find you on the Twitterverse?
Oh, I am at Luke B. Shelton on Twitter.
There you go. Easy peasy. And thank you again. You are welcome, sir, as part of our extended family. We've got a lot of good things coming up. Tolkien Reading Day is in March. And whoa, it's going to be great. I want to wish you all the luck in the world and continued success with editing and working with the Tolkien Society's official publication. That's very, very exciting as well. And also, people should go to the Tolkien Society and look up how to participate and become active members themselves. Big shout to Sean. Say hi to Mr. Gunner, and say hi to all the good people at the Tolkien Society. My best regards to everyone. For you, the audience, thank you for being our faithful Hobbit lads and lasses, all coming around to gather around the campfire and listen to us trade stories and mischief. So until next time, we'll see you online at the One Ring Net. I am QuickBeam2000 on Instagram and Twitter, and this is Clifford Broadway on behalf of the OneRing.net saying thank you, Justin, and to Mr. Saint, who's behind the scenes. Thanks to the team helping put the show together. We'll see you next Tuesday. Until then, buenas noches y buena suerte.